Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kyoto Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans. He did it, baby. He did it. Elijah Dotson has officially made the 53-man roster for the Chargers. The official final roster has been revealed. We're going to be going through the entire roster with you guys today. Oh my God, guys. Cut day. Am I right? Probably one of the biggest roller coaster days of the offseason for me on one hand. Super excited to see what the team's going to look like going into the regular season. Watching some of these narratives unfold of some of these guys like undrafted free agent Elijah Dotson making the final roster. Then on the other hand, cuts can be kind of tough to stomach, right? Some guys were hoping to make the team that didn't, and we're hoping at least makes it back to the practice squad, keeping their dreams alive of playing for the Chargers on a Sunday. So here we go, guys. The Chargers 53-man roster. We're going to go through the reveals like I do all the time. I made, a graphic showing you guys kind of what the offense and defense looks like, but boom, that's all you get for now, okay? A little small taste, a small preview. But we're going to be going through that graphic pretty thoroughly on what the Chargers decided to do at every single position, what my thoughts are on that, and what I think the Chargers look like in terms of a complete team going into the season. So should be a pretty good time. Before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. You guys have heard me talking about this all offseason. Well, it's time to throw down the regular season, like a week and a half away. This is where things get really fun, baby. If you guys want to jump in on the action, best fantasy platform on the web. Use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. And with that, let's get into this. Before we do, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. If a small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's jump into this, baby. Lights, camera, action. Reaction time. The Chargers' final 53-man roster has been posted via the Chargers, via, I think, Daniel Poppers, where we got our list from. And we're going to be dissecting what happened this lowly Tuesday afternoon in which the Chargers had to submit the final roster. Lots of cuts and heartbreak, as well, I would say, a couple of stories that really do tug at the heartstrings in terms of maybe their chances of making the roster not super high. And here they are, man. Part of the Los Angeles Chargers going into the season. So yeah, I know a lot of people excited. Before we do jump into all of that, everybody in the comment section, let me know what you think of the Elijah Dotson. Of course, everything kind of comes with the price. Elijah Dotson making the team means 4 running backs for the Chargers. Some guys had to be let go, but do you think that the upside in Elijah Dotson is worth it? I think he might actually be worth it in that instance. So you guys let me know in the comment section below. So let's jump into this graphic. All right, okay, this graphic right here. You guys know this graphic. We put this together every single time the Chargers we're looking into their roster. We're trying to predict what's going to happen. We used it, I don't know, a couple of months ago in terms of what I thought the final 53 is going to look like. And actually, a couple of these guys that we had predicted did make it. Now, of course, let's go ahead and jump in to the first slew of positions here at offensive line. The Chargers, to finish this one off, Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson, Jordan McFadden, Corey Linsley, Will Clapp, Jamari Sawyer, Brendan Hymus, and Trey Pipkins gonna round out your offensive line for the Chargers going into this season. And I know there's a couple of people that are kind of shocked to see the Chargers parting ways with Zach Bailey. Of course, this guy probably had the best offseason in terms of Chargers backups in the offensive line, and it was really shocking to see them go with, let's say, a Brendan Hymus, who might have been struggling just a little bit over the past couple of seasons, in favor of that. Now, I've been seeing some, I guess, opinions roll in on Twitter, or X now, and on Instagram and on Facebook as to why the Chargers perhaps do feel this way. Now, the first thing I do kind of want to point out is the orientation of the offensive line. You guys will notice that Zion Johnson, Jamari Sawyer kind of swapping sides there, but I think a big reason for that is as well as the Chargers may view themselves as a team that have a guy in terms of a backup guard, a backup tackle, et cetera, they've kind of got a combo that they're comfortable with, if that makes sense. And last season, I think Jamari Sawyer won a lot of respect and a lot of trust from the team in terms of what he can provide as maybe a hybrid guard slash swing tackle. I don't think there's a lot of teams in the NFL that have a player like this that's honestly, coming into the league looking like a guard. This man's going to be a guard for the team. And then lo and behold, he comes into his rookie season left tackle and just kills it. I don't remember the last time I've seen a narrative like that, but it really blew a lot of socks off of a lot of Chargers fans. And I do think if you're the Chargers, you have to kind of look at him as like, okay, if we do have an issue on the outside, which of course is very important in protecting your quarterback, very important in generating yards on the ground, I think we need to rely on this guy. We're willing to move things around for the first time in a while, if that makes sense. The Chargers, in my opinion, they don't like to fiddle with the orientation of the line too often, but in my opinion, and from what I'm reading from others as well, Jamari Sawyer may end up being the swing tackle for this team. Thus, the backups in Hymas and maybe McFadden made a little bit more sense. The other backup here in Foster Sarell, I'm sure is going to maybe have to see some time too if the Chargers need to call upon him. Can knock on wood. Some of these situations don't have to come to light in the regular season. All right. Next up, let's take a look at the big boy in the middle here, man. The Chargers making a huge decision, I would say pretty early yesterday before, cuts were starting to get submitted, in letting go of 7th round pick TCU quarterback Max Duggan. I'll be honest, fellas, I did not see that one coming. We were all starting to create narratives of, Max Tebow Duggan. How are they going to use this guy? Do the Chargers perhaps have their own Taysom Hill on the roster? All of us just trying to make heads or tails of what the Chargers are going to do with Max Duggan on the roster, seeing as he was definitely not the best passer out there. Well, all of a sudden, the Chargers, they've done what we've kind of asked them to do for several years, right? They've whittled down the quarterback position to just 2 players, and I do feel a lot better about that. Whatever your opinion might be on Easton Stick, who I think has definitely grown with the Chargers over his time since being drafted by us, I think this is a better formula for the Chargers overall. I didn't hate so much them having, 3 quarterbacks in terms of 1 veteran guy for a couple of years for Justin Herbert. But now that Herbert's left the nest in terms of, mentorship, he's the guy at the, QB for the Chargers for the next 10 years or so. He's been paid. I think just having your standard backup in Easton Stick is certainly not a bad idea. As for Max Duggan, we'll have to wait and see what happens with him. As of now, I haven't heard him being claimed. He might come back as the Chargers practice squad guy. A lot of guys on the practice squad were hoping to return. Guys like Zach Bailey on the offensive line. The chances of him getting scooped up by another team, I think, are pretty high. As for Max Duggan, I think it's reasonably high, but for the Chargers, I think they'd be lucky to see him return to the practice squad, in which I know that there's a rule this season that you can roster 3 quarterbacks, one of them not counting as a roster spot, and I have to assume the Chargers are hoping that they can elevate somebody from the practice squad to fulfill that. So again, it's not a spot that counts on game day. It's kind of like an emergency quarterback, backup spot that they've allowed this season. So maybe this is not the last time we've seen Max Duggan, depending on if he clears waivers. Another big spot here, man. I think it's time to talk about running back. We'll get to wide receiver here in just a second. Running back, congratulations to Elijah Dotson, who made the team. I honestly, guys, coming into today, knowing that the cuts were happening, I wasn't quite sure that Elijah Dotson was going to make it. I hoped that he did, because the upside that he's shown as a runner, the quickness and his short area quickness and speed was really something quite refreshing for Chargers fans from the running back position. I just felt that his lack of ability to catch, which was certainly on display in week 2 of the preseason, was going to hold him back from making the team. Luckily for Chargers fans and Elijah Dotson, it seems that maybe he cleaned up a little bit of that in preseason game 3, as well as the Chargers. I feel like they've got a good feeler out there when it comes to undrafted free agents, and maybe they saw something in Elijah Dotson where they're like, hey man, if we let this guy go, someone else is going to scoop him up and he's going to do good things for them. We're not going to let that happen. Elijah Dotson, man, interestingly enough, the Chargers, now that have themselves 4 running backs on the roster, something that I didn't think that they were going to do, it happened, and I couldn't be happier for Elijah Dotson. And this could also be a telltale move for the future. We have to remember Austin Eckler, who I think is going to kill it this season. Okay, if you guys are afraid of putting him up in your fantasy football drafts or whatever, don't be. I think he's going to be fantastic, especially with the Chargers, considering this could be the last season with them. But that's just my point. This could be the last season with Austin Eckler. And that's okay. If Austin Eckler, hopefully something happens in terms of the money where we can, keep the band together. Austin Eckler can continue building those touchdowns up with the Chargers. If that doesn't happen, the Chargers do all of a sudden have 3 pretty capable running backs. I would still expect them to be in the market for maybe a free agent or somebody in the draft or something like that if Austin Ekeler were to depart. But Josh Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, Elijah Dotson, that's not a bad three to start off with if that's what we're forced to do going into 2024. So either way, some future sight there. I like it. Elijah Dotson brings some freshness to the run game in terms of his speed and his quickness. And then, of course, you got the starter in there in Austin Ekeler that we have not yet seen in this Kellen Moore offense. That's going to be pretty dang exciting. Also to note, Xander Horvath, of course, making the team. That's actually one thing I should say, of course, not, right? I don't think that was an obvious thing to a lot of people. I heard a lot of rumors, a lot of whispers that if the Chargers did roster 4 running backs, that it could cost them the fullback position, of which they sometimes like to run, tight ends and stuff. That's something that most of the NFL is starting to adapt nowadays. Luckily enough for us, though, and the director in particular, as a huge Xander Horvath fan, he was able to maintain his spot on the roster. Next up, let's talk a little bit about the tight end position, which also saw another name I think a lot of Chargers fans were excited to see get a shot with this team in making the roster, even if it was by a little bit of a different circumstances than we thought. Chargers at tight end, Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, Trey McKitty, and Stone Smartt. Welcome to the team, Stone Smartt. Now, one thing I thought would be different in this orientation would be Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, booting out a Trey McKitty and inserting a Stone Smartt. I was like, Stone Smartt has to be part of this football team this year, and I was almost certain that it was going to cost Trey McKitty his roster spot. Now, the Chargers, I guess they got their reasons, right? I'm not going to go out there and say they made a bad call, but they like Trey McKitty. I personally feel that Stone Smartt is much better in everything that they were hoping to get from Trey McKitty. I think he's got better upside in terms of receiving. I think certainly he's been displaying better skills in camp and in the preseason games as a blocker. He's been a fantastic blocking tight end. And I feel pretty good about that, man. The tight end position, a lot of people super hyped on the Gerald Everett year. I think he could definitely have a big one for himself, hopefully earning another couple of years with the Chargers in terms of an extension. Donald Parham, a lot of people want to see him step up this season as well, stay healthy. But in terms of that blocking tight end, I feel pretty good about Stone Smartt. And maybe the Chargers, if they were to make another move here in the next couple of weeks, maybe that would be a position they consider trimming a little bit. The Trey McKittys of the world, if that kind of makes sense. So welcome Stone Smartt to the squad. Excited to see those blocking skills on display, especially if it's going to be for a guy like Austin Ekeler, maybe even those creative plays like we've seen, like a Darius Davis, on those jet sweeps, et cetera, et cetera. He's been fantastic. Speaking of those wide receivers, let's go ahead and jump into that group. Again, maybe a bit of a shocker here. The Chargers rostering just 5 wide receivers. I was almost positive they were going for 6 this season. It feels like they need to every year. This year, maybe the top 5, cream of the crop. They were feeling good about it, and it could be a position I think evolves in the future because there's a couple of guys I was shocked, at least one of them not making the roster. Let's go ahead and go through the names that we have here. Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, of course, at wide receiver 4. Maybe even 3B, 3A with Quentin Johnson, of course, the rookie. We've got Mike Williams and Darius Davis down here, too. I'll go ahead and slide this down a little bit so you guys can see the names. The Chargers at 5 wide receiver, I feel pretty good. I'll list them one more time. Allen, Williams, 2 of the best, one of the best duos in the entire NFL. Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnson, which I'm starting to believe is more of a 3A and 3B in terms of wide receiver. And then Darius Davis, who I think is going to get sprinkled in a lot more than a lot of us think. Now, of course, there are a couple of names, one of which I'm going to mention now, that are on the PUP list, physically unable to perform, right? And that kind of means that at some point in the next, 4 weeks, if the Chargers wanted to activate him and have him practicing or whatever, I think at that point, they'd have to move things around, and then maybe we go to 6 wide receivers if they want Jalen Guyton back. You guys let me know in the comment section below if I'm mistaken, but I think that's how it works. And there's a couple of different players that they're doing that for this season. But in terms of wide receiver, we're looking very, very strong. Of course, Quentin Johnson's going to bring that new element in terms of yards after the catch. You got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, one of the best duos in the league. Josh Palmer, who I think might surprise a lot of us in terms of how he's used this season. And then Darius Davis, kind of like my sleeper dude for this season, right? Not as even a sleeper, just the dude that I think can knock a lot of socks off in terms of how he's used. Does anybody have, a beat on Darius Davis, the 2023 rookie? I'm not quite sure. I think that I saw a lot of things in preseason that got me excited, a lot of things in camp that got me excited. And I think you guys know a lot of comparisons I've been going with him. The Chargers may have their own version of a Tyreek Hill type player. Maybe that comps a little bit closer to Dre Archer in the past with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they can get creative with this guy. And I think already from what I've seen with Kellen Moore, we're going to see a bit more of him this season than a lot of us had anticipated. So there's your offense for the Chargers. Looking pretty frosty. Feeling pretty good about that. You guys let me know if there's any moves that you guys felt that was questionable that you might have done different on the offense. Let's go ahead and move into the defense. this is where things definitely got a little bit tricky if you're a Chargers fan, right? I think there's a lot of names on here that you could have gone one way or another in certain positions, and then maybe even the number of players rostered for specific positions. So let's actually go ahead and start with cornerback. We'll make our way up and go down here. Starting off here at the top, we got Michael Davis, J.C. Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., Jasir Taylor, and Dean Leonard. Now, I thought that cornerback would be another position where maybe they roster 6, right? You can't roster 6 or 7 or whatever, players at every position, but I felt like this might be one of them, considering that there was some undrafted free agents that I was kind of high on. Tywone Mullen, who had a bit of a redemption week last week versus the San Francisco 49ers. You had Cam Brown, who had some upside, and a couple other guys there sprinkled in. Lo and behold, kind of like the wide receivers, I feel like the Chargers feel pretty good about who they have back there, especially given the emergence in development for Dean Leonard and Jasir Taylor. I think both of these guys have looked very, very good for late-round picks for the Chargers in terms of corners, and I think the Chargers in terms of backup DBs are feeling pretty dang good at the corner position. A lot does hinder on the health and return to action and return to form of J.C. Jackson. Of course, if he continues to struggle, we could elevate a guy like Jasir or Dean and feel capable, right? Feel like, okay, these guys, they've shown some progress. They've shown a lot, of upside. I feel like maybe we'll be okay. But I'm betting that J.C. Jackson is going to have a fantastic bounce-back season this year, and Chargers fans can get pretty excited of what we got at the DB position. Not to mention Asante Samuel, who I think is going to have a great season this year. I'm very high on him. And then the often underrated Michael Davis. Chargers at DB look pretty good. Now, speaking of DB, let's go ahead and look at the safety position real quick, starting with the one side here that a lot of us were a little bit concerned about. Chargers, what are we going to do? We've lost, our starting free safety from last season. He retired. Enter in Alohi Gilman, who's been kind of up and down. I would say more often than not up, especially in the last season. What are we going to do here? So the Chargers now, Alohi Gilman, JT Woods, and then Derwin James, AJ Finley, and Raheem Lane. I would actually put one of these guys on the other side and put JT over here, as I do think JT is going to end up playing that Derwin relief role. I like what I'm seeing from Finley. I knew that it was going to be Finley or Mark Webb that made the cut in terms of like a backup guy if they wanted to roster more. And again, this is kind of where I like what the Chargers did in terms of rostering an extra player or two. 5 safeties is actually fantastic to see on this system. Of course, I think a lot of that has to do with Derwin James being that X-factor guy that's roaming around several different positions all over the field. Having guys back there in support of that, I think, is a very good idea. And of course, right under Derwin James, I do expect to see JT Woods, and he could probably move, I would say, AJ Finley over to the other side, but a lot of this is interchangeable, right? Kind of depends on what Brandon Staley wants to do in any given look. I like this. AJ Finley, saw some upside from him. The one guy I was actually hoping would make the roster after seeing what he did in the preseason was Raheem Lane, who, of course, we did see make the roster here today. That's a fantastic thing for the Chargers, its fans. That DB group looks fire. A lot of upside all over the place. So if anything, I think what we've seen from the final 53 in terms of DB is very strong. I like that position group quite a bit. So you guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. Derwin James, when he moves, we'd likely see a JT Woods. And I wouldn't be shocked to see a little bit more JT in the box this season as well. Maybe we, swap that a little bit with Derwin James here and there. And again, that just kind of helps you play the game of cat and mouse a little bit if you're a Brandon Staley trying to disguise that defense. Next up, let's look at linebacker. Right now, linebacker, where are we at? We are at 5 players with Eric Kendricks, Kenneth Murray, Dan Henley, Nick Niemann, and Amin Ogbong Bamiga. I think a very strong 5 players all of a sudden at that linebacker position, where a lot of us were a bit concerned as to, director, what are we going to do? We lost, Drew Tranquil. The year before that, Kaiser White. We get some great linebackers on this squad. They just never stay on the team. Well, this season, I think there's a lot to celebrate in terms of it's okay that ended up being the result, right? We brought in Eric Kendricks, who I think is going to be fantastic. One of these guys that even in his later years, I think is going to make a great impact, especially as a veteran teacher to some of these guys like Dan Henley, who was very closely resembled in terms of comparison to Eric Kendricks. Kenneth Murray's been looking fantastic in camp. I think there's a lot of people excited about his ability to perhaps bounce back this season. That would be so great. Again, just because I feel like Dan Henley fits what the Chargers want to do more and does better in coverage and might even overtake that job, I'm guessing by around mid-season, doesn't mean I want Kenneth Murray to be bad. Of course, I want Kenneth Murray to be great. He's had a lot of struggle, a lot of things outside of his own control that have maybe kept him from being that player that we all hoped we drafted out of the first round. But the case being, it might not be the best fit. If he can bounce back into this season and show, hey man, he's progressed in coverage, or maybe the coaching has progressed in terms of how to use Kenneth Murray a bit more appropriately to his strengths, which I think would be a fantastic thing to see. Maybe we do find the linebacker position being even stronger than a lot of us had realized. But Dan Henley, keep an eye out for him. He was one of those guys that had a fantastic preseason in terms of those games. All right. Finally, let's go down to the defensive line, starting with those interior guys. We got Morgan Fox, Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, Scott Matlock, Nick Williams, and Christopher Hinton. I think there's a couple of names on here. First off, 6 players, that's great, right, for the defensive line. I think there's a couple of players on here, though, or lack thereof, that Chargers fans are a little bit worried about. We wanted to see Tito Agbonia make a return. He's one of those guys on the PUP list that I do see as someone coming back as soon as he's healthy. I think he may take Christopher Hinton's spot here. But then other guys like CJ Okoye, who I really hope stick around in the practice squad, because I feel like the Chargers, in terms of defensive line, I know we haven't been great versus the run. I know there's been some struggle there in terms of sometimes pressure. I think last season was actually pretty good interior pressure. Either way, there's names there that I feel make me a bit more relieved in terms of the depth that we have. I think defensive line was one of those positions that stuck out to me. I was like, oh my God, we do have some guys here. We got some dogs here, as a matter of fact. And the guys that ended up making the team, I'm pretty secure on that. And I think it will evolve as we do get Tito and some of these guys back. And of course, I do think some of these guys will stick around in the practice squad as well. Some people have noticed that I think Brendan Fayoko may have not made the team for the Steelers. Maybe he makes a return. I don't know. Either way, defensive line ended up becoming one of those positions that I felt a lot better about towards the end here. So defensive line looking pretty dang good. The one guy that I do wish made the team that did not, which again, there's a lot of positions where I feel like there was some quality talent in the background, was Jared Clark. I feel like Jared Clark could have maybe made this team over a guy like Christopher Hinton, but I do think Hinton had a pretty solid preseason as well, so you can't hate it too much. And then finally, to wrap up the defense, we got edge players and Khalil Mack, Tuli Tuipulotu, Joey Bosa, and Chris Rumph. 4 players. I think that's absolutely fine for the edge position. We've seen a lot of upside from all of these guys. Rumph looked fantastic. Of course, we know Bosa and Mack are going to ball out. And then Tuli showed out in the preseason games as well. Seeing this unit of the edge players and the defensive line as a whole come together, I think is going to be a lot of fun, y'all. Because you can't just imagine, Khalil Mack, Tuli, and Bosa rotating at edge, but I think Morgan Fox is going to have a fantastic season this year. I think Sebastian Joseph Day has potential to put up some serious numbers in terms of pass rush as well this season. And then Austin Johnson, his return is going to definitely help versus the run. I'm excited about this unit. In terms of the defense, I think those DBs in the defensive line, they look pretty dang good for the Chargers. I'm pretty optimistic that they're going to have a fun season. And finally, to wrap up this video, on special teams, of course, we've got Josh Harris, the long snapper for the Chargers. As far as I'm told, one of the best long snappers in the league. I believe you. Cameron Dicker ends up winning the job. The Chargers traded their other kicker and Dustin Hopkins to the Cleveland Browns for a 7th-round pick. Can I just go out of my way in this video real quick to say thank you, Dustin, for everything you gave this team. That was some warrior spirit if I've ever seen it, especially from the kicker position. He ended up doing a lot for the Chargers, even giving us a 7th-round pick on his way out. We hope him and wish him the best in continuing his career at Cleveland. All right, fantastic player. In my opinion, the Chargers may have one of the best punters in the league in J.K. Scott. That's definitely something noteworthy. And then, of course, returner Darius Davis, who may actually end up getting a little bit of Elijah Dotson sprinkled in as well. We saw him return a couple of kicks as well. Either way, very strong special teams, one of the strongest I've seen in a long time. Very strong defense. I think this is a deceptively nice defense in terms of how complete it looks for me. And then the offense also looking very, very nice. Again, I've mentioned this in the past. The Chargers have a very strong roster right now. There's going to be some changes next year because of the money. The money factor is going to kick in, and it's going to definitely cause the Chargers to have to make some sacrifices. But let's all put our feet up and appreciate the roster that Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley and company have assembled this season. I think it's absolutely fantastic. A lot of upside all over the place with Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis. Now we have guys like Elijah Dotson and Stone Smart, coming in here with some upside. We've got the obvious stars and, Eckler and Herbert and Williams and Allen. We got a great offensive line for the first time in years. Then we've also got a very solid defense with playmakers all over the place like Derwin and JC and Asante and Mack and Bosa. We are blessed. We are blessed to have a great team. Will the coaching and the Chargers front office make the most of it? That's what we're all here to wait and watch and see in the 2023 season. But as far as the roster construction, I'm pretty dang happy with how this team ended up. So you guys let me know in the comment section below how you feel. As far as a grade, I don't even know if I want to grade this. I feel like the offense is like a strong A. I feel like the defense is like a strong B+. The special teams is also like an A+. Like, I feel very good about this team going into the season. We just have to see everybody execute properly. So, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you liked what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub. On your way out, we'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up, stay frosty, and congratulations to Elijah Dotson, man. I can't believe he did it. I'm so excited to see him get a couple opportunities this year.